I see death an awful lot. And death intrigues us. We talk about it, but do we really want to talk about it when it matters? Polls would suggest that 2 out of 3 of us think that death is a taboo subject. Interestingly, 3 out of 4 people in a separate poll think that we should talk about death more. Many people feel that they don't want to talk about death. It might be morbid. It might be frightening. Perhaps it's quite negative. If you are in that camp, can I invite you to the hospice across the road, and you will see anything but morbidity, fright, and negativity. Perhaps, however, with good reason, we may feel negatively. The stats are fairly robust and absolutely irrefutable. The grim reality is that 100% of us, when we reach the end of our lives, will die. So why is it that we struggle so much to plan, to treat our deaths as preciously as we treat our lives? How do we struggle to respect, to provide consideration, to provide forethought? We need to consider what really matters. What really matters most to you sitting here today. And I would suggest that we should be doing this within a compassionate community. Now, I could stand here in a beautiful nurse's uniform. I could be here representing our beloved National Health Service. I could be here as an advocate for Winchester Hospice. I could be here with reams of statistics about end-of-life care and about palliative care. But actually, I've chosen to stand here as a regular daughter of a regular man, so that you might relate, because we are all children of somebody. And that is the beautiful Winchester Hospice. So here is my father. Now, this talk is not really about him, in case you're listening. This talk is about us. It's about you. It's about enabling our community to think about the rest of our lives and making sure that with one opportunity that we get it right. So as you can see, he smokes a pipe, promised to always hide from grandchildren. He was an academic. He was a teacher. He was a historian. He wrote numerous history books. He also wrote many, many academic papers. We hear that death is the great equalizer. But is that really so? What do you see on the slide? What have you heard me say? My father knew he was extremely privileged, and many papers have shown that that is not always the case, that somebody might expect or even might experience a good end of their life. Because, of course, people come from vulnerable situations. People come from areas of deprivation, disabled, those with mental health problems, those who are imprisoned just down the road. We need to change this. It is unacceptable. Like many of you here, also, I am troubled by the numbers of lonely older people. There is a wonderful sociologist that some of you may have heard of, David Sudnow. And back in 1967, he talked about the problematic notion of dying. He talked about an older person becoming irrelevant, that they don't feel important, that they don't feel that they're being heard. And quite shockingly, he coined the phrase, socially dead. That needs to change. It is completely unacceptable. He famously wrote that an older person might cease to be an actor in the world of the living. Just reflect back on that older person that you might know. They may be your mother, your father, your sister, your brother. They could be in your road. They could be a neighbour. They could be a school parent, grandparent even. How would they feel? And how would that make you feel? So we think and talk about what is important in life. My father retired at the Welsh borders in Herefordshire. His nearest neighbours were cows, sheep, a mile down the road, a solitary farmer, and possibly 3-4 miles down the road, a very small town. He needed to be able to drive, and he needed to have a car big enough to drive an awful lot of even older people to church, to the shops, and so on, because he was part of a compassionate community. He continued to love the things that have driven him throughout his life. He would love reenacting battles at any given opportunity with bricks, that is the Treaty of Versailles. He would love to reenact battles at supper time or political situations with pepper pots, knives, forks, napkins. Supper times went on and on and on. And we often didn't resolve the solution, and he often allowed us to consider what might have happened and could there have been a different solution. I would go to bed with my brain aching. He was an active grandfather. Like so many old people, he was incredibly important, incredibly valuable. He had so much to share and learn. And we noticed that things would change. It took a little longer to get up from the sandpit. A little more creaking could be heard. And his beloved garden on the Welsh borders became a little more wild, and those areas that he could tend would shrink. Sometimes, when we think about getting old, we have to think about making choices, and that is really difficult. We want to have control. We want to plan our lives. We plan our births. I try to plan my children's lives, spectacularly unsuccessful, as they very articulately tell me. And I'm mindful how much better off they are when they plan for themselves. But an opportunity arose for him to come and live next door to me. Quite astonishing. I couldn't begin to imagine that he would ever agree. But in true style, he looked back as a historian. He looked at facts. He gave it some thought. He did a lot of digging, he tells me, probably prayed. And the next morning, he rang me and said, "I will come." The shock, the excitement, the how do we buy the house and remortgage all of our houses in order to do that in Winchester, because I was so certain that he would say no. But my word, what a choice he made. Because what I observed, and what I have observed as a nurse of many years, is that as people get older, their priorities change. The things that we think that they hold so dear, they are happier to relinquish, and they care more about being loved, having somebody close by, having a reassuring voice, knowing that there are health services. I can't begin to tell you the improvement in my father's health when I introduced him to the incredible services of the National Health Service. So he became in control again of what we might refer to at work as a micro-environment, a smaller house, smaller rooms, a little kitchen that he could hold each side a galley kitchen. He even had a smaller garden, much smaller garden, a blank canvas on which he could make his mark. And he absolutely did. He dug up the turf that my husband had lovingly laid, and he created his garden. And he had energy, he had vivacity, he continued to teach, he raised money for charity, and he lived a good life. So we talk a lot about older people being frail. It's a word that we familiar ourselves with as an adjective, but actually, frailty is a medical condition. And it simply describes that process when our bodies begin to get tired. And over 50% of those over 85 would be described as medically frail. But that is not anything to worry about. It's completely normal. But we just have to think, how do we help people and how do they help themselves a little differently? So my advice would be, do not give an older person lavender bags, but consider giving them dumbbells instead. My father was 6'2". I am clearly not. As I would pop over in his last few years of life to give him a hug, to boost his immune system at the beginning of my day or at the end of my day, I would constantly remind him that all I can do is provide a soft landing. So would you mind reconsidering doing press-ups on the stairs? But he was very lucky because actually he had a slow-growing prostate cancer. He had a little bit of heart failure, all completely normal. But so many people have more complex issues. They may have cancer. They may have dementia. They may have dementia and cancer. They may have other conditions, more complex heart failure. And for those people, they will probably and possibly be referred to a palliative care team. Now, in palliative care, words are our tools. I love words. So, palliative is quite frankly a beautiful word. So, for those of you linguists amongst you, you might recognise that it comes from a Latin origin. And actually, the entire word, palliative, talks about serving to cover. That's what it describes. Now, if any of you have visited Winchester Hospice, and have I mentioned if you have not, please do, you will see a quilt on every single bed. Now, I love making quilts, and I often think of a quilt, as we have here, my father's quilt that I made him, as summing up what good palliative care is. And of course, as with every quilt, it will be different. You can see the colours, the symptoms, the pain, anxiety, when we're frightened, nausea, I could go on. The symptoms change, and that is because everybody is an individual. So how do we ensure that we get messages across? How do we ensure that the older people that you know can really plan for the rest of their lives? So I would urge you, be brave, be courageous. This is a respect form, and this forms part of what we call an advance care plan. Everybody can have one, particularly older people. What would you like the rest of your life to look like? What matters most to you? If you were ill, would you mind going into hospital? Is there anything you fear? I have never heard an older person saying, I would love to be resuscitated. I would love someone to jump on my chest in hospital. I would absolutely love to die in hospital. It's so peaceful. I do not hear those words, and with good reason, because in hospital for a frail person, over 95% of those resuscitations will be futile. And so we come to the end of my father's life. He couldn't make it to the back garden. Neighbours helped him sit in the front garden. He was part of a compassionate community. And I recognised he was sleeping more, eating less, withdrawing from the world. And so, a few days before Christmas Eve, I moved his bed downstairs with a little bit of help. And there he is, the day before he died. He died on Christmas Eve with his dog and our dog on his bed with the quilt that served to cover. My challenge is, please think about the older people that you know. What can you do to ensure that they have the end of life that they really want? And be brave and get yourself to a GP and get that respect form completed. And please share the word.